Flick cuts versus full arm cuts. The debate rages on. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So this is just actually going to be a brief video, but there's been some discussion today in the HEMA parts of the internet, continuing to talk about so-called flick cuts, or should we say smaller range of motion cuts, and bigger motion cuts that traverse a wider angle, greater distance, whatever. Okay. Now there's clearly a disparity here between people who focus on lots and lots of cutting and people who focus on lots and lots of fencing and don't necessarily cut. Now I have always been a big fan and supporter of people doing cutting and doing test cutting. Okay, so this isn't anti-cutting at all. But equally, my own experience and lots of other people I know, whether it's with one-handed swords or two-handed swords, have demonstrated over the years that there are certain types of small motion cuts which can be extremely effective on certain targets. And I think something that's getting overlooked here is that what are those targets? If those targets are someone's hand, someone's wrist or forearm, someone's neck, someone's head or face, sometimes someone's thigh, then these types of flick cuts can be important enough and effective enough to greatly change the nature of the fight. They don't have to be fight-ending, fight-stopping cuts, as I demonstrated recently with relatively small amount of movement. Yes, you have to aim through the target. You don't stop on the target because that wouldn't be cutting. That would just be, I don't know, like touching. But so long as you aim through the target to some degree, if you're cutting through a branch the size of my finger that's made of oak wood, then clearly that is doing enough damage to someone's face or someone's hand to change the nature of the fight. And I think this is what we need to remember, is that changing the nature of the fight, if it's easily achieved, is extremely important. If I can really mess up someone's sword hand, or if I can really mess up someone's ability to see or fight or concentrate because I've hit them in the face with a pretty easy blow with minimum motion and movement that has exposed me very little and risked very little, that's worth doing. Not every blow you land on an opponent has to be a fight-stopping, body-cleaving in twain blow. And in fact, it's stupid to do so. And the sources say so. The sources, I mean, if we look at the sabre sources, if we look at John Musgrave Waite, for example, he makes a distinction between leading off cuts and full arm cuts. So what do I mean by that? Well, very simply, for anyone who's not familiar with fencing, there are several articulation points in the arm which can be used to generate power in a cut. One of them is clearly the wrist. Okay, now the wrist can be used to give what we could call a flick cut like this, or the wrist can be used to perform what's called a moulinet or molinello. Okay, so a full turn here clearly has lots of force, but it's only coming from the wrist. Okay. Equally, we can also power a cut from the elbow, and if we look at Italian Rodelli sabre, for example, a lot of the cuts will come from an elbow motion, or indeed we can use the entire arm. Now, if we look at just one source, if we look at John Musgrave Waite, for example, he might start off on a guard known as high second, which is coincidentally very similar to guards used with side swords in Marozzo, for example. And some cuts indeed might be given with a turn purely of the wrist or hand. And in fact, he actually tells you with a leading off cut to not bring back the point. And the reason being that with a leading off cut or an opening cut, what he doesn't want to do is create openings. So if I'm fencing someone and I want to start with a number one cut at their head in order to create an opening, that cut might be a direct forward movement with a lunge step and purely moving the sword around itself, around the hand, essentially. However, if they cut at me, so if I'm in high second and they cut at my head here and I parry prime, my arm is now a little bit bent, and when I return and give my riposte, I can use a full-bodied blow with the full arm. That is very often the case. So for example, if we guard in cart here, so if I've guarded in cart, the arm is now bent and loaded, and I can unload with a strong cut, for example, a cut number 2 like I just showed there, with the full arm. So we have full arm cuts, and we also have little cuts, snap cuts. So you've got snap cuts, molinello or moulinet cuts, and we've got full arm cuts that are essentially a bigger version of a flick, but they're done with the whole arm. Now the problem leading off, that is commencing your motion with a full arm cut, is it's extremely exposing. Yes, in theory, if I'm fencing someone and the first thing I do to them is a big arm cut, whoosh through here, and I chop them in half, brilliant, fight stopped. However, if they're a living, breathing, thinking human and I start to move my arm in a big circle around here, they can do a stop thrust or a stop cut at the inside of my wrist, or they can do one of those snap cuts at my hand while moving out of distance, so they are too far away for me to be able to hit with my full arm hit. So exposing myself to a potentially fatal stop thrust or stop cut or disabling stop cut, or just simply a voiding out and counter-cutting tactic, is a very, very bad idea. And for that reason, these snap cuts from the leading position or opening up as we start to attack someone are a really, really good thing to do. And they don't risk my body in doing so. So ironically, they are actually in some ways more catered towards real life self-preservation, combat and fighting, and less towards tournaments. In a tournament, well, you know, I can risk this because what's the worst that happens? I lose a point. I maybe lose the bout, lose the fight, get knocked out of the tournament. That's the worst kind of thing. If, however, we're fighting in a real fight with sharp swords and I go, whoa, and do a big hit like this, and someone goes, dunk, and hits my wrist on the way through, oh, god damn it, it's disabled, run through the body, dead, fight over. So doing things that overly expose you are stupid in a real fight against sharp weapons. So to conclude, a fight can involve many, many different targets. Okay, you could be aiming at the head, the hands, the arms, the legs, the body, and different types of cuts will have different effects on those things. Some parts of the body are covered in clothing, some of them are bare and exposed, like the face and the hands usually, if you're not wearing gloves. And therefore much easier targets. So a so-called flick cut, or a cut that isn't going to chop someone's arm or leg off, but will disable the hand or will chop into the neck and cause huge amounts of blood loss, or into the face and be disabling in that sense, are incredibly important, incredibly useful, and moreover, a lot of those attacks expose you less and are worth doing because they are not risky. So you don't always, every time, go for the big fight-ending blow because it exposes you more, is higher risk, and is more predictable, frankly, and usually easier to parry, and is less likely therefore to hit and has a lower success rate. So to finish off, quite simply, these snap cuts or flick cuts, whatever you want to call them, the bigger distance they traverse, yes, the more they will cut, but as I demonstrated, with a relatively small traversing of distance, you can chop through things which would be really unpleasant if they were parts of your body. I will demonstrate this on tatami mats soon when I get hold of some, because if you doubt that cutting through oak wood is anything to be impressed by, that's fine. I accept water bottles are fairly easy targets. I think tatami mats are usually pretty easy targets as well. But anyway, if people want to show, want me to show cutting on tatami mats, I will show cutting on tatami mats. And we will also have a little look at this issue again of covering less area, covering less distance with the cut and seeing what we can actually do. And maybe we'll also have a little look at drawing cuts and pushing cuts and see what effect they might have on flesh as well, because some of those things can be pretty nasty. And I should also remind people that we work from the treatises, most of us do anyway, in HEMA, and the treatises are very clear and explicit about the fact that snap cuts, whether it's done with a Scheitelhauer with a longsword, or whether it's done snap cut with a side sword or a sabre, are absolutely things that were done in combat and were taught, presumably because people across those hundreds of years with numerous different swords found that they were effective in fights. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I'll see you again really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.